am a licensed psychologist here in Kingwood in private practice. And just a little bit about me. I'm a graduate of Texas A&M. There we go. Did my undergrad at Texas A&M. Then I did my master's degree up in Pennsylvania at Westchester University. Nobody? Somebody? No, thank you. Just throwing me a bone. I appreciate it. And then from Westchester, I went on to the University of Houston. There, we got somebody, right? Where I did my doctorate in counseling psychology. So, first up, there's a couple of hotlines that I have. Oh, let me tell you a couple other things about myself. I'm sorry, I wanted to talk about my family too. My parents are here today supporting me, Steve and Judy down there. And then I've been married to my husband, Ryan, for 12 years. He's at home taking care of our two kids, who are 8 and 5. And so just wanted to mention that I'm a parent too. Okay, now, on the first couple of slides that I have for y'all tonight, I have 2 different hotline numbers. I want to make those available to you guys in case that anybody here might be thinking of suicide, having suicidal thoughts, suicidal behaviors. This is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number. This is a resource that you can use. As Alec mentioned, there's cards there on that table by the door that provide information, the same information as well as warning signs, which we'll be talking about tonight as well. And then the second slide provides the Veterans Crisis Line. This is a crisis line specifically for veterans who may be experiencing suicidal thoughts or behaviors. So that is a specific number. I believe the VA is involved with this particular hotline number, and so that's available as well. And I can provide that information to anyone privately outside of those slides. Okay. Next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about the scope of the problem of suicide. One of the things that I really want for you guys to kind of take away tonight is to understand that suicide and suicidal ideation does not discriminate. There is no one particular person who's necessarily exempt from experiencing suicidal thoughts. And so I want to share some statistics to kind of explain that. There's a lot of ways that we could go about talking about that. I'm going to focus just on age. There's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of ways I could cover it, but I'm going to just focus on age for tonight. If anyone's interested in other information, I'm happy to share that afterwards. So first of all, can y'all see these slides? I'm referencing them. Okay. This data comes from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who track the top 10 causes of death across the age range. And they have found that suicide is the second leading cause of death amongst young people, ages 10 through 14, 15 through 24, and 25 to 34. Another way I could say that is just 10 to 34, but I think you missed the nuance in this, and this is important. What this statistic tells us is that for young children, teenagers, late adolescents, and adults, suicide is the second leading cause of death. That blew me away when I saw it. This covers a huge age range, and it starts in elementary school. And we need to take that seriously. Like I said, there's no one who is necessarily exempt from experiencing legitimate risk for suicide, including young children. Beyond those ages, it's 4th among adults ages 35 to 54, okay? This is within the top 10 causes of death, 4th among adults. The rates have increased 33% from 1999 through 2017, and more sharply since 2006, so it's on the rise. And it remains the 10th leading cause of death overall. So of all ages, it is still the 10th leading cause of death overall. Another thing that I think is helpful to know is that 50% of adult mental health issues begin by the age of 14. 50% of mental health issues that adults have begin by the age of 14. So this starts younger and can carry on through adulthood. Okay. Also, suicide is an important problem amongst older adults. Once we get past the age of 65, that CDC data, there's a lot of things that are gonna cause the death of older people before suicide does. So it's not the 10th leading cause, but it's still important, and it's still an important risk factor. There are special things to consider when we're talking about older adults, particularly 65 and older. First of all, older adults plan suicide more carefully and more intentionally, and they use more lethal means for committing suicide. And so they are often, when they plan it, they mean it, and they do it, okay? They're less likely to be discovered and rescued. They're often living alone. And the physical frailty of older adults means that they're less likely to recover from an attempt. So I share this just, again, to underscore the importance of taking seriously the mental health needs of the older adults in your life, particularly those who are isolated, who are experiencing health concerns, who are depressed, experiencing other mental health issues. Suicide is an important thing that we need to be mindful of and monitoring for the older adults in our lives. So as I said, my takeaway in all of this is really that suicide is relevant in people of all ages, from young children to older adults. And we need to listen and pay attention when anyone of any age expresses deep psychological distress. All right, moving on. So let's talk about who's at risk for suicide. So the next slide. There are many important risk factors, and there are many groups who are at particular risk. I'm not gonna give you that laundry list right now, but if anybody's curious about specific groups who are at increased risk, I can share that information with you afterwards. Tonight I wanna focus on the major risk factors in general. Some of them are listed here, some of which I'm gonna just share with you. Prior suicide attempts. So if someone has previously attempted suicide, they are at greater risk for suicide and suicide completion. Those who misuse and abuse alcohol and other drugs. Those who have been diagnosed with mental disorders, particularly depression and other mood disorders. I want to say on that though, obviously those who are diagnosed are at greater risk for suicide, but there are people who are not diagnosed with mental health disorders who are also at risk for suicide. And I think that is a misconception, that if someone is not depressed, they're not at risk for suicide, and that's not true. If someone is depressed, they're at greater risk, but that does not mean those who are not diagnosed with a mood disorder, such as depression, are not at risk. Does that make sense? Okay. Also, having access to lethal means, things that a person might use to attempt suicide. What access do they have? If there are guns in the home and they're at risk, they're at greater risk for completing suicide. If they know someone who's died by suicide, particularly a family member, if they're isolated socially, chronic disease and disability, so people who are experiencing chronic health conditions are at increased risk. Those who have lack of access to mental health care, particularly effective mental health care. And often what we find statistically is that those who have completed suicide have not received mental health care in the months leading up to that behavior. What's important too, and again, I have data that I can share with anyone who's interested after the fact. I cannot share it off the top of my head, so don't put it in your Q&A, because I'm gonna have to say, I don't know. I'll get to you later. But that risk factors can vary by age group. Age group, culture, sex, and other characteristics. So particular groups have particular risk factors. Just as an example, the LGBTQ community is at greater risk for suicide due to things like discrimination and bullying that they might experience, and that puts people in that population at greater risk. Okay. All right, so we talked about the risk factors. Let's talk about protective factors. So protective factors are personal environmental characteristics that help protect people from suicide. These are qualities, these are characteristics that a person might have that can protect them from suicide. The first, of course, is effective behavioral health care. So we want to make sure that we're getting people the mental health care that they need and that they're getting good mental health care. And you may not be surprised to know that I am extremely opinionated on what that means. And I would be happy to share with anybody what I think that means if you're interested in finding out. Connectedness to individuals, family, community, and social institutions. Having social connections, having people that you can go to, having people that you can rely on is a protective factor. We talked about risk factors before, social isolation being a risk factor, helping people get connected and making sure that they have those connections helps protect people against suicide. Life skills, and this covers a lot of things. We're talking about problem solving and coping skills, the ability to adapt to change. There's a number of life skills that we might consider that when people have these skills, we're helping protect them from suicide and suicide completion. So self-esteem and a sense of purpose or meaning in life. I'm going to get on my soapbox for a little bit here. Self-esteem is a good concept, but it's a limited concept, and it can be a problematic concept because in order for us to have self-esteem, culturally, that usually means we need to put ourselves above somebody else in order to have it. And so we're changing the way we think about that and focusing more on self-compassion. So I went ahead and put self-esteem here because I'm taking this list of protective factors from this source, the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, but I wanted to take a second to talk about self-compassion and what that means. So self-compassion gets a little bit more involved with being mindful, understanding that there's a common human suffering, if you will, and that we need to basically show ourselves grace in the ways that we show others grace. And so it takes the focus away a little bit of like, I've got to be better than somebody at something in order for me to have self-esteem, which is where that tends to go, and instead focuses on how can I be gentle with myself, how can I forgive myself, how can I have compassion for myself in addition to others. And then cultural, religious, or personal beliefs that discourage suicide. Having those beliefs, having those values can help protect a person from suicide. Okay, next slide. So I went ahead and posted this hotline again because I'm going to talk now about what to do if anyone in this room, if you yourself are experiencing suicidal thoughts. What are some steps that you can take to seek help, to get the help that you need? And the first thing you could do is find a therapist or support group. Not the first thing, that's a thing you could do. Ways to find a therapist. The best way is to ask others who they've seen and have they benefited from that person's services. You can also check your insurance, of course. I always recommend to people, if you need to use insurance to pay for your mental health services, pull up your insurance plan and get a list of providers, and then go to Psychology Today, which is a website, and cross-reference that list with what Psychology Today has, because you get more information about those providers there, and then usually if they have a website, you can link to their website from their Psychology Today profile and learn more about them. Because what happens is you get this list from your insurance provider, and it's just names on a list. It doesn't tell you anything about that person, and it can feel very overwhelming and very daunting to start going through that list. We, as mental health professionals, are not super great at returning phone calls. That is just notoriously true. We're behind closed doors much of our day, and so sometimes you'll make 10 phone calls and get maybe 5 back, and so that can be really frustrating. So I always encourage people to do this kind of cross-referencing that I mentioned because it can make the process a little less frustrating. Go to your pastor and ask him or her what referrals they have. Jeremy has referred a number of people to me, which I'm grateful for. And so I know he has connections in the community and is actively involved in mental health and very aware. And so Jeremy's a great resource for asking who he would recommend, or just talking with Jeremy as a support person as well, or other people on staff. Your church staff are resources for you for seeking that support. Okay, building a support network is really important. I want to talk about this too. When we talk about a support network, we have to think about who are the trusted people. Who are the people in my life that I can go to and be open about and know that they're not going to condemn me, they're not going to judge me, they're going to hear me for what I have to say. And consider that when you're deciding who you're going to go to, because how that person responds is important. It's very important. And so knowing who are the trusted people. And part of this is suicide's a hard topic. There's a lot of people that are extremely uncomfortable with it. And so there may be very well-meaning people in your life who you can trust with any number of things, but who may not be able to respond in the way that you need when you talk about something like suicide. And that's not because they're bad people or anything like that. It's just, this is a tough topic. And so considering that when you're choosing who you would talk to. And related to that is who can reliably help. So not only can they hear me, but then will they do what I need done to help me get the help that I need? And when I'm talking with young people, children, adolescents, teens, young adults, those people that you choose to go to need to be pretty mature and responsible so that they can do the right thing to help you get the help you need. And I'll be honest, there's a lot of young, children and teenagers who don't necessarily know what to do. And so they may not be able to help you. So considering that, if you're a young person who's experiencing suicidal thoughts, your best friend may be that's your person, right? That's the person you can go to, but that may not be the person who has the maturity and just the knowledge of what to do when you come to them with that information. And so just bear that in mind. You can also help yourself by using your support network, by expressing yourself, keeping an open mind, and showing appreciation, really fostering those relationships so that when the time comes, they're there for you. Also, making a safety plan is really important. There's a lot of things that go into a safety plan. The first thing is you've got to recognize your own personal warning signs. What does it feel like? What does it look like? What am I doing? What am I thinking when I'm starting to experience suicidal ideation, or I'm at greater risk for experiencing suicidal ideation? Just knowing yourself and knowing what does that feel like. Because the earlier we can catch anything, I don't care what emotion we're talking about, I don't care if we're talking about anger, sadness, impulsivity, the sooner we can catch it, the more effective our intervention is going to be. So really knowing yourself, knowing what it feels like inside your body, knowing what your thoughts are, knowing what your behaviors are, can really help you be more effective in intervening and seeking help. Using your own coping strategies and making sure that you have a good, long list of adaptive coping strategies. So we can have maladaptive coping strategies, things we do that don't help. They make the situation worse. So I encourage all of my clients to create a coping behavior list that they keep on their phone, or they keep in a piece of paper that's always in their pocket or in their wallet or something like that, so that they can go to that list, run their finger down that list, and pick something. Because when we're in crisis or we're in a really high emotional state, our brain is basically like, there's a bear, and I need to get away from this bear right now. And when there are bears around, we don't need our frontal lobes. This is up here. That's where decision-making happens, problem-solving happens, regulating emotion happens. Our brain's like, nah, I don't need that right now. I need all my energy right now to be down here in the back of my brain where I run, so I got muscle tension, I've got breathing that allows me to run faster, and I've got tunnel vision because there's the exit. That's all our brain is processing in that moment. So even though the crisis, there's not actually a bear, right? Our brain is reacting the exact same way. So we don't think as clearly, we don't think of solutions as well. We have muscle tension, we have disrupted breathing, and we have tunnel vision. Did I say tunnel vision twice? Possibly. Y'all are with me. Okay. I think right now you really know about the tunnel vision part. So my whole point in that is that we're not really good at coming up with a coping strategy when we're in get away from the bear mode. We're really good at running and stuff, right? We're not good at thinking of the things that help us cope with non-bear situations. And so the list that I referenced, you pull it out, you look at it, you run your finger down it, you pick something, and you do it. You don't have to think of it. You don't have to create that right then in that moment. You have it there to use. Okay. Let's see. So again, socializing with others. When you're in crisis, seeking that support, doing something to distract yourself, ideally telling them, seeking that support that way too. Contacting a family member or another trusted adult. Contacting a mental health professional or an agency. Calling a suicide hotline number. You can also text certain numbers. They have text services as well. Or just making sure your environment is safe. Get the things that are tempting out of your way. Don't have them around. Get them out of there. And then finally, you can get more information. Use any of the resources that I've mentioned. I can point you towards others as well. There's a lot of different hotlines. There's some Houston-based numbers. There's a lot of different things that you can do. Okay? Okay. Next slide. This comes from a website called BeTheOne2.com. You see it there in kind of that golden color. These are 5 action steps that you can take if you know somebody who's experiencing suicidal ideation or behaviors. And so we're going to go through those steps now. They are ask, keep them safe, be there, help them connect, and follow up. So ask. This is really, really important. You need to ask, and you need to ask in a very direct and clear manner. This is not the time for beating around the bush. This is, are you having suicidal thoughts? It's saying the hard thing. It's asking the hard question. Because if we hem and haw, if we beat around the bush, the person might feel uncomfortable and they may not feel like it's safe to give us a direct answer. So a direct question often gets us a direct answer. So that's really important. And again, I acknowledge it's uncomfortable and it can be really hard, but it's so critically important that we ask in a very clear, direct way. Also in a non-judgmental way, right? Other questions that you could ask might be, how do you hurt and how can I help? But the one thing I really encourage you not to do is to keep it a secret. Do not promise that person that you will keep their suicidal thoughts a secret. They may want that, they may beg that of you, but that would be doing them a disservice ultimately, because that's helping them not get the help they need. And that is one of the most important things you could do once you know someone has suicidal thoughts. So please do not promise that you'll keep them a secret, and please do not keep them a secret, let alone if you promise or not. Tell somebody, help that person get help. This is really important too. Again, going back to those age statistics, you've got to take them seriously. Hear what they say and take them seriously. Don't, young kids, it's natural to say they don't know what they're talking about. They can't mean that. They don't even know what that is. They don't understand death. They don't have to understand death to make a suicide attempt. And so take them seriously. Also listen to their reasons for being in such emotional pain. And also listen for any potential reasons that they want to continue to stay alive. That's really, really important. Being able to focus in on what it is that somebody can say that this is a reason to stay alive, and then you're going to use that. You're going to talk about that. You're going to reinforce that with them. So listen for that as they're talking to you. But don't try to provide them your reasons why they should stay alive, because they're in bear mode, right? They're not hearing that. They're not processing that. Okay. This is important. The studies show that you cannot increase suicidal ideation or create suicidal ideation by asking about suicidal ideation. It doesn't work that way. So don't worry about, am I going to give them an idea? You're not going to give them an idea. Chances are the idea is already there, and we're not that powerful. We're not going to be able to give them that idea, okay? All right. So then the next thing is to keep them safe. Once you've determined that suicide is being talked about, it's important that we do some things to establish safety. So first of all, you want to find out, have they done anything before to try to kill themselves? Because remember, if they have, their risk is greater, and we need to know that. Do they have a plan? Do they know how they would kill themselves? Ask that question directly. Have you thought of how you would do this? If yes, do you have access to those means? If they say, I think about shooting myself, do you have a gun in the house? How detailed is that plan? What's the timing for the plan? And again, what sort of access do they have? Asking all these questions can help us understand what do we need to do to make sure that they're safe. We know what the factors are if we ask directly. Typically speaking, when I'm assessing risk, A, I want to know, are they having thoughts? B, I want to know, do they have a plan? C, I want to know, do they have means? Do they have access to that plan? And then D, do they intend on carrying that plan out? Those are the various steps that we need to think about when assessing risk. The more yeses we get, basically, the greater the risk is. And that's when we need to really think about, do we need a higher level of care to keep this person safe? Hospitalization is not always the answer, but if a person knows that they cannot keep themselves safe, or you feel pretty confident that they cannot, we need to do something to make sure that that person will be kept safe when they cannot do it themselves. You can also do things like calling authorities to help deal with any firearms that might be in the home or other lethal means. Okay. The next step would to be there. This could mean being physically present for them, speaking with them on the phone, or any other way that can show support, but show that support and be there for them. It's really, really important that you follow through. So don't say you're going to do something if you can't follow through on it. That follow through is critically important. So if you're going to be there for a person, be really honest with yourself and with them about what ways you can be there for them, and then do it. Follow through and do it. And if there are other things that they need that you can't supply, point them in the right direction, make calls yourself, do what you can do to help, basically send in reinforcements. You can talk with them too about developing some ideas for how others might be able to help them. And again, listening is very important. Find out what and who they believe will be the most effective sources of help for them, and then help them get those if you can. So being there for someone with thoughts of suicide is life-saving, because again, let's think about those risk factors and those protective factors. Social isolation is a risk factor, connectedness is a protective factor. So if you can be there connecting with that person, you're already helping them. Okay. And then help them connect. That's the next step. So helping someone with thoughts of suicide connect with ongoing supports, like the Lifeline number, for example, other local resources, their pastor, supports, maybe a counselor at school, maybe their youth leader at church. Helping people connect with other people who can help support them is really important. And it creates a safety net, right? We want to have as many safety nets in play as possible to help protect this person. And then explore some of the possible supports with them. Are they currently seeing a mental health professional? Have they seen someone in the past? Was that person helpful to them? Let's reconnect with them. Are there any other mental health resources in the community that you can help them connect with? Help them develop a safety plan. That's another way to help them connect. And this can include ways that help them identify that if they start to experience significant severe thoughts, these are the things they'll do in a crisis moment. So having that plan in place is important. Kind of like my coping list that I talked about, a safety plan serves the same function. We don't want to be thinking of a safety plan. We don't want that person thinking of a safety plan when they're in crisis, because that's going to be really hard to do. Part of that safety plan too is a list of people that they can call. So that specific safety plan, that these are the things I'm going to do if I'm in crisis and I'm experiencing suicidal ideation. These are the people that I can call. These are the people I can connect with when that occurs. There's also an app called My 3 app. It's a safety planning and crisis intervention app that can help develop these supports, and then it's stored conveniently in that person's smartphone for quick access. Okay, and this is very important and often missed, following up. So after your initial contact with someone who's experiencing thoughts of suicide, after you've connected them with the additional supports that are needed, make sure you follow up with them to see how they're doing. Leave a message, send a text, give them a call, stop by with coffee, do something, follow up, check in. How did it go? Was that helpful? Do you need something else? Follow up is one of the most critical components of helping people survive suicide afterwards. It's also a great time to check in and see if there's more that you're capable of helping with, saying things that you thought of later. We all think of that, right? And other things that you could do to help them. This type of contact can increase their feelings of connectedness and share your ongoing support. And there's evidence to suggest that even a simple thing like sending them a letter, sending them a postcard in the mail can help them feel that connection and like you care. Studies have shown that a reduction in the number of deaths by suicide when follow-up was involved, particularly after acute care was received, has helped reduce those rates of suicide. So after someone's been hospitalized, for example, if there's some follow-up that's happening, that person is less likely to complete suicide in the future. Okay, so I'm going to touch briefly on self-injury, self-harm, what we call non-suicidal self-injury, or NSSI. That's on the next slide. This is a whole topic in and of itself, so I'm not going to unpack all of self-injury for you tonight. There's a lot to this, and it is distinctly different from suicide. And so what I'm going to focus on tonight is the relationship between non-suicidal self-injury and suicide. Just going to put a little plug out there. If we want to talk about self-injury later, I'm here. This is what I'm going to focus on tonight, okay? So self-injury and suicide are different, and I'm sorry, this is really hard to read. One of the critical differences between the two is the intention that goes into them. So suicide, the intention is to end the pain, to not feel anymore, ever, to end your life. With self-injury, the intention is to feel better. People self-harm in order to feel better. It's a way of coping with pain. It's a way of relieving pain. Suicide is not a temporary short-term relief. It is permanent. So in general, NSSI, or self-injury, is a behavior that's taken to feel better or cope, and suicidal-related behaviors are taken to end one's life. Non-suicidal self-injury is not a suicide attempt. It's most often used as a way to regulate emotional pain or to self-soothe, okay? Some self-harming behaviors can result in death if they're lethal enough. That's not common, but it can happen. But that's generally not the person's intent when they do it. Also, non-suicidal self-injury is a risk factor for suicide-related behaviors. So again, just because someone is engaging in self-harm, that does not mean they're suicidal, that they're experiencing suicidal ideation, but it does become a risk factor for suicidal behavior. And the reason for that, one of the primary reasons for that is when somebody engages in self-harm, particularly if it's the more intense the self-injurious behavior is, they start to desensitize basically to injuring the body in some way. And that over time, that can then desensitize to a suicidal behavior. So let me say that a little differently. Committing suicide is not an easy act, right? It is a scary thing to do. And it's not that common. People who self-injure, over time, they're causing injury to their body in a way that can make that step a little bit easier to take, if that makes sense, because they've desensitized themselves to causing harm to their body in some way. So suicide and self-injury also differ in terms of the methods that are used. Usually, self-injury causes harm to the body only, to the surface of the body, where suicide-related behaviors are more lethal. So it's very uncommon for individuals who practice self-harming behaviors, who are also suicidal, to use the same methods. So someone who practices, as they say, NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury, they are not going to do that in the same way that they're going to attempt suicide. Does that make sense? They're going to take different methods for doing that. And so that's a primary difference between the two. And the frequency is different. Self-injury happens often on a regular basis or in kind of spurts, off and on, off and on, off and on, where suicide attempts tend to be discrete, crisis-related, not frequent behaviors. They're much more rare. This is an important difference also. Again, it's hard to see, but in this bottom right corner here, it talks about cognitive constriction. Cognitive constriction is black and white thinking. So it's seeing things as all or nothing, good or bad, one way or the other. And it allows for very little ambiguity. So people who are experiencing suicidal ideation are often experiencing high cognitive constriction. They have a lot of black and white, all or nothing thinking. This goes back to the listen step that we talked about. When someone is experiencing acute crisis and they're having suicidal thoughts, and particularly if they have a plan, they're in this high level of cognitive constriction. They're having very black and white thinking, and it is, this pain will never end. I'm a burden to the people I love. I'm going to be doing everybody else a favor. They believe this. That is why people complete suicide, because they believe these things to be true. This is the only way that it is. And so you don't want to engage in a debate with somebody. You just want to hear them and then support them. People who are self-injuring don't have that same level of black and white thinking. They're doing this for relief. And so a lot of times they're a little more flexible in their thinking than someone who's experiencing suicidal ideation. That's a very important factor for understanding why someone who is experiencing suicidal thoughts, you can't talk them out of it in that moment. And if we focus on that, we're going to lose them. Does that make sense? Okay. And then, of course, the aftermath is often quite different between the two, as you can imagine. Okay, I'm going to move on from that. So the next slide talks about common risk factors. There are common risk factors between non-suicidal self-injury and suicidal thoughts. Those are a history of trauma, abuse, or chronic stress, high emotional perception and sensitivity, history of alcohol or substance abuse, feelings of worthlessness, having few effective mechanisms for dealing with emotional stress, feelings of isolation, and the presence of depression or anxiety. These are all risk factors that are common between suicidal ideation and non-suicidal self-injury. That few effective mechanisms for dealing with emotional stress is a really critically important piece. Often people who self-injure do not have better ways for coping, and we need to help them develop those skills. So if you know somebody who is self-injuring, it's very important to help them get the help that they need. Connect them with a mental health professional who can teach them the skills to cope in an adaptive way and to break that cycle of self-injury. Okay. And I think I have one more slide, but I think in the interest of time, so we can get to the Q&A, I'm just gonna leave it there. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you. Here, I can move it.
Oh, well, I'm gonna do it.
All right. So we already have some questions that are rolling in, and hopefully tonight has been helpful for you. Let's see if there's some other things that we can unpack. Some of these might be shorter than others in terms of what it takes to answer them, but let's just kind of go down the queue here.
Okay.
Here's the first question that was asked. Is there a difference in suicidal methodology based on age or sex? And I think for age, you were saying earlier, yes. For those that are older, they tend to be a little bit more aggressive in their approach. But just generally speaking, is there a difference in suicidal methodology based on age or sex?
So the age question, I don't know as well as I do the gender question. You're right that younger people tend to be more impulsive, where older people tend to be more thoughtful and planned out and use more lethal means as a part of that. There is a difference in between males and females. Males tend to use more lethal means for completing suicide than females are. So statistically, females are more likely to attempt, males are more likely to complete.
Okay.
Because they use more lethal means.
Because they use more lethal means.
Right.
I got it. Okay. So why is the suicide rate going up among youth who spend a significant amount of time on smartphones?
So the causes are hard to pinpoint. So in terms of research and statistics, it's hard to answer that question. Certainly, social media is a focus, right? Mm-hmm. We've seen with the increase in social media that there's the rate is spiking as well, right? We've talked about since 2006, it's increased even more sharply. So, particularly among adolescents and teens, this idea of I don't have the right word in my mind right now, but being influenced by what they're hearing other people say is part of the development. It's the way their brains work at the time. And so social media exposes teens more to hearing about these things, reading these things, and then influencing them and creating ideation within themselves.
Yeah. Is it true, is this kind of a follow-up before I get to the next question, is it true when you take a look at teens especially, that the copycat effect, some would say that if there's a teen that commits suicide, then we need to go on kind of high alert because the copycat effect is very real for them? Yes. Is that true?
That is true. That's one of the reasons, I'm sure everybody's heard of the Netflix series 13 Reasons Why. Yeah. There was a lot of concern from lots of sources, not just the mental health community, but because of this copycat phenomenon and the fact that, again, just developmentally where teens and adolescents are, they're more susceptible to this sort of thing, to the influence, and copycat behavior is a part of that.
Right, yeah. So for those of you who don't, how many of you know of 13 Reasons Why? You know the show that she's mentioning? It's a Netflix show, right? Mm-hmm. But it's, while I say this while having not watched it, but it's about a girl that commits suicide, and I think there were 13 videos that she made. Is that right? Or there were people that she, something like that, that directed as to why she had done it. So it was 13 Reasons Why. And your point is well taken, because some of the concern
Yes.
is that this is very suggestive
Yes.
to teenagers. And so maybe this just was a road that they shouldn't have gone down.
Right. And the way that they did it was very graphic. There was some making it look attractive. And so not only did it, the whole copycat aspect of it, but also the triggering for anyone who had past trauma. The depiction of trauma in that series is very graphic,
Okay.
and that was problematic as well.
Got it. So, and I think this kind of builds on what we're talking about with the next question, and it's got a lot. We have likes here on Minty, so if you like the question, you hit it. But the question was, do you think the amount of pressure put on youth for academics and achievement is leading to a higher suicide rate?
So again, I'm going to speak more from my opinion rather than data.
Okay.
So take that for what it's worth. But yes, I think so. And I've lived other places. I've practiced in other states, and I moved here from Northern Virginia, so that's the DC area, and I found there that there's a lot of high functioning parents in the DC area, as you might imagine.
Sure.
And those students were under a lot of pressure. And the particular high school that we were zoned to, for example, had a number of suicides while we were living there. It was becoming a bit of a crisis. And since coming to Kingwood, I find it's very, very similar, if not worse. Because what I'm finding here in Kingwood is that the competition is fierce. There's a lot of high-functioning, high-performing parents who have high expectations of their children here, and those expectations are academic and athletic.
Right.
And so these students are put under a lot of pressure to perform on a very high level in both domains. And so I find that, yes, there's a lot of pressure, there's not enough hours in the day, and people's identities are being built on this definition of success and what that means. And it's mental health is taking a hit as a result.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. All right, so how about this one?
Okay.
So how can you tell the difference between those who are experiencing actual suicidal ideation and those who are simply seeking attention? So are there different signs or flagged behaviors that we should be aware of?
That's a tricky one. I would say in general, err on the side of caution. Past behavior is going to be probably your best indicator in that sense. Consider the risk factors, consider the protective factors that we talked about. So someone who's at increased risk, who has more of these risk factors and fewer of the protective factors, take them seriously, right? Help them get the help that they need. But there are times where behaviors can develop that it becomes a cry for help or a way to seek attention. That is, I almost would say leave that to a trained professional to eke out. Just get that kiddo support or that adult support, because they need support either way. There's a reason someone is acting in that way if it is just a cry for help, and they're probably in emotional pain and need some support either way. In young children, it can happen that you develop a pattern of the behavior being reinforced. And so with young children, we don't know as much about how to help young children who are having suicidal thoughts. There's just not as much data on it. But there is a fine line between getting that child the support and help that they need and reinforcing a certain behavior. And hospitalization is often not a great choice for a young child. And so that's, again, an area where it gets real dicey and it can be hard to distinguish, and getting a trained professional who can help clear those lines up.
Right, yeah. So that would be the time where you just take it seriously, kind of as a rule of thumb, erring on the side of caution, getting them to a person that can kind of get to the heart of the matter.
Yes.
And so, okay, good. So here's one. It says, I have a friend that's age 50, feels worthless and has no purpose, financially well off, retired, and then wife told him to move out. So lost husband, mother/father identities. As a result, depressed, talks to suicide. What do I do?
So you take those 5 action steps that I shared with you guys. I would say that person is at risk. There are a number of risk factors there. An older male who's lost his sense of identity, a relationship has ended, there's some isolation happening, and they're telling you that they're having suicidal thoughts.
Right.
That is someone who needs help, needs support. So asking them those direct questions, asking them, do they have a plan? If they have a plan, what is that plan? Do they have access to those means? Connecting them with a mental health professional or someone else who can help keep them safe.
Okay, got it.
Did I answer that?
Yeah, I think
Okay,
so.
okay.
Let me follow up with this though. So as far as the notes that you provided, maybe somebody in here says, hey, that would be helpful for me to have. Is it okay if we share those
Sure.
with them?
Yeah.
Because I think it might provide something, so you can reach out to me or Alec, and we'll be sure to get those to you for those of you that are interested in the PowerPoint that you used tonight. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
And of course, if you use them, you're not going to plagiarize them. You're going to be good people and give ascription to her, right? All right, I've obviously been a professor for a long enough time that I have to say those kinds of things, right? We're going to give ascription to the people that did the work. All right,
Let me just say on that note,
Yeah.
too, that those 5 action steps, the website is listed on each of them, be the 1, 2, 1 being the number 1. You can go to that website, and that's where I got
and
those
that's where you
graphics.
got it. Awesome. Okay, so how about this? Because you mentioned veterans earlier. That was a different category even. You had its own slide.
Right, yes.
So why are vets having a harder time coping today than the vets we saw come back from World War II? Did something change?
The honest answer is I don't know. I'm inclined to say, did it really change? Or was it that way before? I mean, the vets of World War I, World War II, they talked about shell shock and that sort of thing, which is
Right.
what we understand to be PTSD today, or post-traumatic stress disorder today. So I think it's likely that the vets of World War I, World War II were not getting the help and support that they needed.
Okay.
And I would say, and I don't have the data to back this up, so I'm just
You're just throwing this out
I'm
there.
just throwing it out
All right.
there. I might be wrong. I would warrant a guess that incidents of suicide or homicide are not greater now, but the media
The information,
coverage,
access to it?
yes, we know more about it now. We hear about it more now, which gives this perception that it's happening at a higher rate. I don't know that to be true, so just saying that.
But access to the information might be kind of a salient difference
Yes.
from now to then.
That we just have a better understanding of it now. We're hearing about it more now. I seriously doubt that there's much of a difference, but I just don't know.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. So what's the current theory about why the U.S. is seeing such an increase in suicide rates? So why is it rising faster than in other developed nations?
I don't know. That's the honest answer.
That's
Again,
okay.
Yeah, because when I tried to research the causes, it just kind of kept coming back to, it's really hard to identify the causes. Some of it may be cultural factors, different beliefs and that sort of thing. There was I read some things about that different cultures have different belief systems around help-seeking behavior or suicidal behavior, and that may be a contributing factor, but.
Do you think that there's anything to, people point out the significance of having the health of the nuclear family. And I know that in some of the stuff that I've read, is what you've seen is a lot of collapse in the United States in terms of what a healthy nuclear family would look like. Do you think that has anything to do with it? Higher divorce rates, higher dysfunction in families, and so forth.
Well, sure.
Do you think that's at least part of the story?
Well, sure. I mean, if you think about what that creates in terms of risk factors, there's social isolation, there's the end of relationships, there's lack of connectedness, the collapse of a family and all that comes with that does introduce risk factors into that family's life.
Right.
So,
Okay, fair enough. So with that in mind, what are some effective mechanisms to share with those who are experiencing suicidal ideation? Now, I think it said, is there a website those trying to help can access immediately to give support in the moment. And I think you pointed it out in the previous question. I was just kind of going to the next one in line, right? And of course, we'll be glad to provide those for you as well if you just reach out to me and Alec in case that you forget. I want to build on something earlier about smartphones. So the question on smartphone use and those kinds of things. And this question builds on that. Does cyberbullying lead to suicide, or is the suicide rate based more on other causes?
So cyberbullying or bullying, period, is a risk factor. So if a person is being bullied, they are at greater risk. So I would say yes, it's contributing to the rate. Whether it's a direct, what the correlation is, I couldn't tell you. But again, I think it goes back to that exposure too, that there's greater exposure due to the, how much we use social media and how much social media is a part of young people's lives.
Right.
Well,
they're all on it, right?
Right, they are all on. They have to. I mean, it's
the way they connect.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it can be helpful, right? It can be used for connection and seeking support, and that can be helpful, but it can also be harmful. And so talking with your teenagers, your adolescents, about how they use social media and what they take in and what they sort of filter out is really an important part of the conversation.
Right. And that has to deal, of course, with the interaction with the parent of the kid, right?
Yes.
So just being actively a part of your kid's life.
Yes.
So how about this one, though? Is it worth the risk to take antidepressants when one of the side effects is increased risk of suicide and suicidal behavior?
So that risk is typically in younger people more so than it is in adults. And as long as you're, following up with a mental health professional, with your psychiatrist, with whoever your prescriber is, then that's a risk that can be managed. And if you start a antidepressant medication and notice that you're having increased thoughts of suicidal ideation or self-harm, then you need to report that to your medical professional, and they can talk about changing doses or changing medication. Right. I can go on my spiel about medication if that would feel helpful. I don't know.
Do y'all want to go on her spiel about medication? Can I hear? All right. I think they said yes.
Okay.
So go for it.
Okay. So here's my take on medication. And again, if we can be talking about depression, we can be talking about ADHD, we can be talking about anxiety. There's a lot of this is my spiel in general. The way I see medication is that it's not the first line of defense. We don't necessarily want to go there first unless we just know that we need to. And to me, there's a continuum. And somewhere on that continuum, a person is going to benefit from therapeutic services without the need for medication. And as long as that's happening, why introduce medication?
Right.
But then there will come a point where we say, the symptoms are so intense, significant, however you want to say it, that they're not able to benefit from the services that are being provided, the skills that are being taught, and then we need to start talking about medication, because there is a time where there's, the symptoms are such that we need a baseline level of kind of bringing things down so that person can then benefit from the things that they're learning. And that's when I think there is a time and a place where sometimes some people just need medication so that they can access these behavioral strategies.
Right, and to process the counseling that they're receiving and so forth.
To get out of bed to get to the counseling.
Right, exactly.
In the case of someone who's severely depressed.
Got it. Good. So one person said they have a friend that stays isolated and withdrawn. They won't meet. They rarely will talk or even text. So how do I help, or how do I get some connection actually going with them? I mean, it's tough because you can't make them, right?
Right, and I have more questions, I guess, than I have answers right now. I guess one question I would ask is, how do you see this person right now? What are your opportunities? Is this someone that you see at school? Is this someone that you see at work? And trying to build on that, where you are able to see them and connect with them. Just continuing to try asking them how they might like to get together more or talk more, what would work for them, but that you love them and you want to, support them and you want to be their friend, and just looking for ways to connect more. And then ask the direct question. I mean, if you're concerned that person may be having suicidal thoughts, asking that direct question. Asking them, are you okay? Are you hurting? Asking specific questions that are open-ended that they can respond to.
Right. So avoid the yes or no.
Yes.
And get more where it draws something out of them.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. One person said they're from Victoria, Texas. Welcome.
I know who that person is.
Okay, well, they said, thanks for this. What about the risk of suicide among seniors, especially widows and widowers who feel alone and worthless?
So, I'm sorry, ask the question part of it again.
So it said, what about the risk? So I think it's about the risk of suicide among seniors, especially widows and widowers who feel alone and worthless.
Right. So again, we're seeing multiple risk factors there.
Right.
We're seeing the loss of a relationship.
Right.
We're seeing some isolation, and we're hearing some thoughts that are not directly expressed suicidal ideation, but certainly are in that neighborhood.
Right.
And so I would be reaching out to that person, asking them those specific questions, making sure that they're getting the help that they need, making sure that they have the connections that they need. If they don't, helping, how can they connect? Just, again, going through those 5 action steps with them. Okay.
So, and in following, I think we've been talking a lot about people that deal with suicide or suicidal ideation. Let's talk for just 1 second about people on the other side of it. So imagine that they have a loved one or a friend or something like that, they reached out to, they did everything that they could to provide help. They were open, they were honest, they took every measure that they knew to take, and unfortunately the person takes their own life. A lot of times what happens as a result is the person that is still alive feels like there was some way that they failed them in the process of trying to help them out. What are some ways that we need to kind of think or kind of process through that experience once that's a kind of a lived reality?
Sure. Well, I think self-compassion is a great skill in that situation. It may be that, again, similar things, seeking support and connection, being able to talk with somebody about those feelings that they're feeling, talking through there's likely the feelings of guilt, the feelings of ineffectiveness may come up. Just being able to process that with somebody that's a trusted support person, and, grappling with those themes of guilt and ineffectiveness, and then practicing self-compassion, being aware of those thoughts and those feelings, being aware that there's probably others who felt the same way, others who may have tried to support that person, and practicing self-soothing, working on dealing with your own feelings and your own thoughts as a part of that. Again, that granting yourself grace, and forgiveness.
Yeah, because it's perfectly natural, at least from what I've seen, for people to think, well, had I reached out to them just one more time, and that would have been the time, but I didn't, and so that's why I was asking the follow up. And so, just in the interest of time, we're going to do one more.
Okay.
All right. Are you ready for it?
All right. I hope so.
Okay. Are there any statistics that show how many people tend to attempt suicide or commit suicide between Christian versus non-Christian or non-religious people?
I did not come across any statistics like that. That's not to say they're not out there, but the sources I was looking at didn't tend to break it down by, beliefs and that sort of thing. I could go back and take a look at that, but not that
Those
I
weren't the categories
saw.
that they were kind of dividing it up.
Yeah, that's not one that I saw, so I wouldn't be able to answer that.
Okay. Actually, another question popped up. Do you want to do it real quick? All right. Really, this is the last one. And then I'm shutting you down, all right? If an adolescent has suicidal thoughts and you're told to immediately take them to a medical facility, are you required to take them to a mental hospital or work to get into a psychologist as soon as possible?
Are you required to?
Are you required to take them to a mental hospital or just work to get them to a psychologist as soon as possible?
Gotcha. So that, it doesn't have to be a mental hospital necessarily. You may end up there eventually, but you could just go to an emergency room at any hospital, and they will assess there and then possibly send somebody on to a specific psychiatric hospital. In terms of you, the person who's providing that care, who's trying to make that decision, I would go back to those assessing risk that I talked about. So if this person is having suicidal thoughts, okay, check. Do they have a plan? Yes, okay, check. Do they have access to that plan? Do they have means for carrying that plan out? Yes, okay, check. Do they have intent on carrying that plan out? Yes, okay, check. Let's go to the hospital.
Okay.
I think in that situation, that's someone who needs to get to a hospital if they feel that they cannot keep themselves safe. If you're able to create a safety plan that can be monitored and followed up, it is possible that you do not need to go to a mental hospital, but you need to make sure you've got that on lockdown, like that you've got that sorted out, and you feel confident that you can keep that person safe and you can keep that person monitored. You've removed access to means. There's a lot of steps you would need to take.
Right.
But if you can ensure that person's safety through, those monitoring and that sort of thing, you don't necessarily need to go straight to a hospital. So it really comes down to what is the level of risk and crisis that person is experiencing at that time.
Right.
And, if you can get a mental health professional on the phone who can help make that call, great.
Mm-hmm. Good. All right.
Yes.
Even if you have other questions, we're done. Mm-hmm. First, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I hope you found tonight to be helpful. One of the things that we do at Veritas is we take really difficult questions, many of them that have come from you, and we put them on the table. And we think that it's important to discuss these things. We also think it's important to give the opportunity to ask some of the questions that are on your mind and on your heart and maybe have even been derived from your experience. And so first, I just want to say thank you for making yourself available tonight. So if you thank Dr. Amie Allain for coming tonight.